tinted glasses never catch red flags. Fool me once and I'll resent your ass. Fool me twice, our friendship ain't gonna last. Fool me 3 times, it's not gonna happen. I'm worth much more than just to be a fucking puppet. I don't really give a fuck about your excuse or how you justify the shitty way you treated me. And I don't really care if I don't ever hear from you. Destined for success, your girl Lorette's a queen. This ain't like the last time. Empty promises and past lives. Didn't suit them, so I cut ties. Glass eyes, glass eyes, glass eyes. Oh, this ain't like the last time. My skeletons give me a bad time. But stick around to leave me high and dry. Glass eyes, glass eyes, glass eyes.
Don't you hate on me cause you know you ain't grinding. Don't you hate on me cause you know you ain't shining. Don't you hate on me cause you know you ain't diamond. I'm gon' sip my tea, sip at my seat reclining. Heard you was talking that smack, so there's no need for hiding. Heard you putting words in my mouth, so there's no need for typing. Keep on hating, we gon' throw hands like my name Mike Tyson. Frostbite way too hyping, he don't need no hype man. Hype man, hype man. Ay. I know they mad cause I'm running right through. I know they mad cause I'm spitting my truth. I know they mad cause I'm making my moves, yeah. I know they hate, they got nothing to do. I know they hate when I run with my crew. Watch them all hate when I'm breaking the news.
This ain't like the last time. Empty promises and past lives. Didn't suit them, so I cut ties. Glass eyes, glass eyes, glass eyes. Oh, this ain't like the last time. My skeletons give me a bad time. But stick around to leave me high and dry. Glass eyes, glass eyes, glass eyes.
Hello! Hello, chat. How are we all doing today? I'm doing pretty good. I mean, my day's been kind of a roller coaster, but in the end, it's all good. Let's say we read the next chapter of The Stars and Their Children. We're on chapter 4 right now, and what's happened so far in chapter 3 was Wilbur and Tommy stayed in hiding in a little thing, like in a little space, for a few days. They escaped their planet, and they're now heading to the Antarctic Empire to seek asylum from Emperor Philza. So, let's see what that's about. But before we get into that, if you're new to my stream, be sure to leave a follow, because at 150 followers, I'm gonna be doing an entire stream in a British accent. Alright. The Stars and Their Children is by Bones and the Bees. Amazing, amazing talented writer. If you wanna follow them and follow the rest of their stories, do that, because they're really well written. So far, I've read Tom Unit's Clinic for Supervillains, Under the Brine, and God, what was the vampire one called? I can't remember. I feel bad for not remembering what the name of the vampire one was. Anyway. let's get into it. Chapter 4. Meet the King, Pay the Price. Summary. The brothers arrive to Zephys 4. The wormhole jump from Eldingvegr to Zephys 4 only took about 30 minutes. In the wake of everything that had happened to them the past few days, Wilbur finally having even the smallest bit of downtime felt wrong. Hold on, I just remembered something. I looked back at my stream a couple days ago, and I felt like I was a bit too quiet, so I'm just gonna turn myself up a little bit. Alrighty, there we go. Let's see. I'll start the whole paragraph over. The wormhole jump from Eldingvegr to Zephys 4 only took about 30 minutes. In the wake of everything that had happened to them for the past few days, finally having even the smallest bit of downtime felt wrong. Despite the fact that he knew there was no way for Dream to follow them off the planet, Wilbur kept checking to make sure there was no tracking signature on the shuttle. There wasn't the first time he checked, or the second, or the third. It wasn't going to magically appear, especially not while they were going through a wormhole, but he kept checking for his own sanity anyway. Tommy, meanwhile, spent the entire time searching the shuttle for food. This wasn't a stocked shuttle that had been ready for travel, so all he was able to find were 2 water bottles and a bag of nuts. But considering they'd been living off rationed water and decade-old breakfast bars for the past few days, it was the equivalent of ambrosia and nectar to them both. And then, the hyperdrive shut off. The ship jolted with a sudden stop, and when the view outside the front window came into focus, Wilbur sucked in a sharp breath. They had stopped right above Zephys 4. Looking down on it, all Wilbur could see was ice fields spread over the entire planet. With a few taps on the console screen, Wilbur saw it was well below freezing on the surface. Just lovely. How the fuck does anything survive down there? Tommy asked, stretched over the console and staring down at the planet with wide eyes. Really good installation? Wilbur guessed, although it was a weak one. Tommy raised a doubtful eyebrow. Wilbur shrugged before turning back to look down at the planet. You sure about this, Will? Tommy asked after a moment, his voice precariously fragile. No, Wilbur wasn't sure about this at all. He had no idea what Emperor Filza was going to think of their asylum plea. The man was said to be ruthless and power-hungry, but he wasn't a fool. From what Wilbur's studies had taught him, there was no reason for Filza to kill them or hand them over to Dream. It just wouldn't make sense. There we go. But also, that was only based off of Wilbur's studies. Filza could be an entirely different man when Wilbur found himself face to face with him. That was just something he was going to have to find out on his own. I'm sure, Wilbur said, hoping Tommy wouldn't notice the way he was twisting the hem of his shirt between his fingers. Tommy didn't say anything in response, and Wilbur took that to mean that the lie passed through undetected. With one final breath to steady himself, Wilbur tapped a few buttons on the control console, slowly accelerating the ship down into the atmosphere of Zephys 4. Sorry, why do I keep getting just like the urge to yawn when I'm streaming? Unlike Eldingvegr, there were no dangerously strong winds to fight against as they broke through the atmosphere of the planet. There was wind, but it was pitifully weak compared to the gales Eldingvegr could produce at the height of the windy season. Wilbur was grateful for the tease of it all. Or for the ease of it all. Because if he had to fight to break through Zephyr's 4's surface, it would give him all the more reason to turn the ship around and try to find another option, even when he knew there was none. They entered a thick cloud layer, the entire view outside the shuttle's windows turning to nothing but white void. Tommy pressed his face against the glass, warm breath clouding it as his wide eyes tried to search for any shapes in the swirling white mass. Wilbur had to rely on the instruments to know which way they were going, and continued the descent as carefully as possible. Once they broke through the initial cloud layer, the white void cleared only to reveal a flat white landscape that really didn't seem all that different from the clouds. There were some jagged mounds of ice here and there, but there were no buildings Wilbur could spot. Not a single tower or even a home could be found on Zephyr's 4's surface. For a moment, Wilbur wondered if they'd somehow been directed to the wrong planet, because this place didn't seem settled at all. It was nothing but a pure, untouched tundra. You could say it was an untouched-ra. Sorry, I'll leave. That was a stupid pun. That's probably the stupidest pun I've ever made. Here we go. Okay. Then, there was the sound of beeping as a message filtered through the radio. Jumping in his seat, Wilbur halted his descent and hit the button on the radio to accept the incoming message. Hello? Is anyone reading me? It was a woman's voice. She sounded impatient, almost annoyed that she was having to talk to them through a radio. Wilbur tensed as he pressed the button to turn on his own mic. Zephyr's 4? This is, Shuttle 7 reporting from the upper atmosphere. We read you. Do you read us? There was a pause, and then the woman's voice returned. Shuttle 7, there is no signature attached to your tracking signal, and therefore we cannot identify where you are from. State your planet and your purpose immediately. Taking a breath to steady himself, Wilbur shared a nervous look with Tommy before turning on his mic to reply. We're from Elding Vega. The SMP Empire has invaded the planet, and we're here to request asylum. Another pause, much longer this time. Wilbur leaned back in his seat, wrapping his arms around himself while Tommy pulled his knees up to his chest. Then... Request denied. Zephyr's 4 is not accepting applications for asylum at this time. It was as if one of the jagged pillars of ice from the surface below had fallen straight into the middle of his skull. Shit. No. They couldn't lose this. Not when this was their only viable option. Wilbur took a sharp breath, ignoring the panicked look Tommy was already sending his way, as he leaned forward to turn on his mic again. No, please, you don't understand. Listen to me, Shuttle 7. We are not an asylum planet. If you do not exit our atmosphere immediately, you are going to be shot down. I understand that, but you have 60 seconds to begin your ascent out of our atmosphere. Please, just 59. You have to... 58. Can I just... 57. The Crown Prince of Elding is on this ship! Wilbur suddenly shouted. The counting fell silent. Wilbur waited with bated breath, shooting a terrified look at Tommy, who had uncurled himself from his ball while his fingers dug into the arms of his seat. Who exactly am I speaking to? The woman asked after a solid 10 seconds of quiet. Dragging his hands through his hair, Wilbur forced himself to straighten up, despite the fact that this woman couldn't see him. You're speaking to Prince Orpheus of Elding Vega. Crown Prince Theseus is sitting right next to me. Emperor Dream has stated his intentions to execute both of us, So we are seeking asylum from the Antarctic Empire. Another beat. Wilbur focused on the sensation of his heart trying to claw its way out of his chest. Requesting permission to take remote control of your ship so that we can guide you to our landing pad? The woman then asked, the sharp edge to her words having softened the slightest bit. Blinking in surprise, Wilbur saw a prompt blaring across his console screen. Remote control override requested. Accept, deny. As much as Wilbur didn't like the idea of giving some stranger complete control over the shuttle. Sorry, that's my dog. It wasn't like he would know where to land otherwise. The planet seemed as empty as could be. There was nothing even close to a landing pad anywhere in sight. If this was the only way he could get down to the planet itself, then it didn't seem like he had another choice. Remote control override requested. Accept. He pressed enter, and the ship jolted as control was taken from him. Wilbur dropped his hands from the console, sharing a nervous look with Tommy as they began to descend closer to the surface. It was odd. One moment, all Wilbur could see on the surface of Zephyrus 4 was flat white ice. Then, he was able to make out a slightly darker series of lumps under the snow, and soon was able to recognize it as metal. Bright red landing signals flickered on, and Wilbur finally was able to see a circular platform embedded into the ice itself. The shuttle landed gently against the platform with far more grace than Wilbur could have probably landed it with. As soon as they had touched down, the platform began to descend into the ice itself, making Wilbur and Tommy both jump in their seats. All of our hangars are under the ice. Once the platform stops moving, drop your ramp and exit the shuttle. I'll be waiting for you outside. That was the last Wilbur heard from the woman before the radio went dead. All around the shuttle, Wilbur could see nothing but flat gray walls as the platform dropped them deeper and deeper beneath the ice. Do you think this means they're gonna let us stay here? Tommy whispered, clutching the arms of his chair. I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure. Wilbur admitted, the inside of the shuttle lighting up with shades of red from the lights embedded into the metal walls. Tommy clenched his jaw. I still think this is a terrible idea. Yeah, well, we're here now, so there's not much we can do. The descent into the hangar took far longer than Wilbur was expecting. After Tommy fell silent, the seconds dragged on like hours as they crawled impossibly far down into the ice itself. Eventually, though, the descent began to slow, and the metal tube they were inside opened up to a cavernous space. The hangar was entirely made of metal. Smooth gray ceilings arched high above their heads in jagged patterns and shapes, as if the space had originally been an ice cavern and the metal had simply been built over top of it. Hold on, I dropped my pen. Where's my pen? There it is. Anyway. Other ships were settled into different spots along the hangar, most being sleek, stealth models that Wilbur wasn't familiar with. People in military-esque uniforms rushed around, holding toolboxes or holopads as they attended to different shuttles and control consoles. The platform stopped moving so suddenly, it made Wilbur smack his head against the back of his seat. While he could see the far end of the hangar from the cockpit, he couldn't see the ramp since that was on the back of the ship, meaning he had no idea what was going to be waiting for them when he let the ramp drop. This could be a mistake. If Wilbur was wrong and Emperor Filzer really was as cruel as some rumors suggested he was, He could be walking his little brother straight to his death. But he wasn't lying when he told Tommy they had no other options. There was quite literally nowhere else for them to go. In for 4, out for 8. Rinse and repeat until the waves stopped crashing in your head. The familiar mantra floated through Wilbur's mind again, and he took a moment to shut his eyes and breathe along with the counting. The waves lapped at the corners of his thoughts, begging him to dive under the surface and drown with his anxieties. But he focused on counting, on quieting the waves until they were little more than sea foam. His shoulders slumped. While things weren't okay, he wasn't going to find out how fucked they were until they got out of the shuttle. Opening his eyes again, Wilbur reached out a hand towards Tommy, who took it without hesitation. Let's go see what we're up against. Squeezing his fingers, Tommy nodded as he pushed to his feet. Yeah, let's go. The two walked through the shuttle, keeping their hands tightly interlaced as the ramp lowered onto the platform itself. A blast of icy air hit them as they stood in front of the opening, and Tommy shivered, wrapping his free arm around himself while Wilbur kept his arms at his sides, determined to brave the cold. Sharing one more look, the two took a breath in at the same time, before walking down the ramp. There was a squad of Zephyr's guards waiting for them at the bottom. 4 guards in dark uniforms made of thick fabric that shimmered ever so slightly, long pants and coats that fell all the way to their ankles, with large belts tied around their waists. In front of the 4 guards was a short woman with a wild head of curls that fell to her mid-back. Her hair was split brown and white right down the center, and her uniform was similar to the guards behind her. But instead of pants, she wore a skirt that fell to her calves, and the accents around her belt were silver instead of black. Wilbur also noticed the woman had large horns curling over her ears and behind her head. Huh. She was an Ovi then. Considering the guards behind her were human, he wondered if there were more Ovis on Zephyr's 4, or if she was just an outlier. He didn't have time to think about that for too long, however, because as soon as he and Tommy got to the bottom of the ramp, she held out a hand to stop them. State your names, please, she said, and Wilbur recognized her as the one on the radio. Stiffening, Wilbur gave Tommy a pointed look. Since he was the crown prince, he had to introduce himself first in any given situation. For a moment, though, Tommy seemed to forget this, and stood there frozen in silence. When Wilbur nudged him, though, he startled and bowed his head. Theseus, Crown Prince of Eldingvecca, Tommy introduced, bowing stiffly while not letting go of Wilbur's hand. The woman's eyebrows raised in surprise, but she didn't say anything as she turned her gray-green eyes to Wilbur. Prince Orpheus of Eldingvecca, Wilbur said, bowing just a tad more gracefully than Tommy. Her eyes sharpened when he said that. You're the one I was speaking to over the comms. Wilbur nodded. Yes, I was piloting the shuttle. Strangely, her expression softened at this, but it was such a subtle shift that Wilbur almost thought he imagined it. I'm the captain of Zephyr's 4's Royal Guard. The Emperor wishes to speak with you both, so I'll be escorting you to him. Is he going to grant us asylum here? Tommy asked suddenly. The captain shrugged. I'm not sure yet. He'll make the call once he meets you. Great. That really didn't help them at all. Still, Wilbur nodded in acknowledgement at that. We appreciate the Emperor taking time out of his busy schedule to speak with us and hear our request. Instead of responding to that, the captain just huffed out something that could have been a laugh. Then, she turned on the heel of her heavy boots, and the guards behind her fanned out to circle around them. Follow me. Wilbur and Tommy still didn't let go of each other's hands as they followed the captain through the hangar and away from the shuttle. Before they left the hangar entirely, Wilbur glanced back at the ship and was surprised to see the ramp had been closed. No one was going near it, which could mean they weren't going to confiscate it. If their request did get denied, the hope was that they would just let the two of them leave the planet without any trouble, but they couldn't do that without the ship. Leaving the hangar, the all-metal walls changed to a mishmash of solid ice and metal paneling. The ceiling was ridiculously tall, even as the walls narrowed in on either side of them to something resembling a normal hallway. More soldiers in dark blue military fatigues hurried around them, and Wilbur noticed that while the majority of the soldiers were humans, there were several Ovies along with a few other species in their ranks. There were a few avians who had holes cut in the backs of their shirts for small wings, and a handful of Enderians whose uniforms must have been specially tailored for their excessive height. Also, there's Origins from the Origins mod in this. That's cool. I'm guessing Ovi must be like a special Origins mod, because that doesn't sound familiar to me. One second. Okay. The last time Wilbur had seen so many different species in a single place was a conference that had been held between several of the planets Eldingvegger was aligned with a few years back. Zephyr's 4 seemed to be more of a melting pot of different populations. If he wasn't currently worried for his life, he would be trying to ask the captain questions about the history of the planet itself. But there were more important things to focus on, and he was pretty sure that even if he did ask, the captain wouldn't answer him anyway. The hallway eventually opened up again to something resembling a terminal station. Several trains floating over maglev tracks were lined up on different rails, with soldiers carrying shipment crates either in or out of them. There was one train near the far end of the terminal that didn't have any crates being loaded into it, and looked much cleaner than the others as well. The metal doors to the train slid open automatically as the captain stepped inside, gesturing for Wilbur and Tommy to follow. Their entourage of guards joined them as well, and once inside, Wilbur saw comfortable-looking train seats lining the walls. The guards pointed where the two of them could sit. Tommy took the one closer to the window, while Wilbur sat on the outside, tilting his body ever so slightly so Tommy was shielded behind him. The captain sat on the seats across from them, folding her hands in front of her as the rest of the guards remained standing. With a loud jolt, the train car began to move. Wilbur stiffened, squeezing Tommy's hand and narrowing his eyes at the captain. "This will take us to the palace," the captain explained. "It should only take a few minutes." Nodding, Wilbur forced himself to relax back into his seat, letting out a long breath between his teeth. Tommy pressed closer to his side, but kept his eyes focused on the window as they rode through another metal tunnel. The train went completely dark for just a moment. Then, the tunnel opened up, and Wilbur's eyes widened as he was hit with the realization of why he hadn't been able to see any structures on Zephyrus 4 from the sky. There was a sprawling, dense city laid out underneath the ice of Zephyrus 4. The railway the train was riding along was set above the city proper, giving them a perfect view of the stone and metal towers that were all crowded together in a stunning example of innovation and industrialization. Above their heads, Wilbur could see long, deadly sharp ice spikes dangling right over the tower buildings. The sky was completely covered by thick layers of white and blue ice, and Wilbur realized the city must have been built into a naturally formed ice cavern. Sitting at the top of the city along what must have been some natural ice mound was what Wilbur could only guess was the royal palace. The structure was all harsh lines and dark metal, creating a sharp contrast between itself and the smooth, curved lines of the ice-cavern walls. Seeming as though his nerves were momentarily forgotten, Tommy pressed his face against the glass, cheeks squished and eyes blown wide as he stared in awe at the city as they rode above it. Wilbur couldn't help but do the same, laying half on top of Tommy to get a better view. It was amazing, but terrifying at the same time. The city was awe-inspiring to look at, so different from the intricately carved towers that dotted the Rook Ring. But where Eldingvegr was a planet of snow-white marble and rosy skies, Zephys 4 was a planet of black metal and frigid blue ice. Where Eldingvegr had soft edges, Zephys 4 had jagged ridges. Beautiful, but wholly unfamiliar in every possible way. "Holy shit," Wilbur whispered, his chin resting on top of Tommy's head where both their foreheads were pressed against the window. "Yeah, fuck," Tommy whispered in reply. Behind them, there was the sound of quiet snickering, and both boys stiffened as they remembered they weren't alone. Wilbur threw himself back into his own seat, while Tommy pulled away from the window and curled into Wilbur's side. Wilbur glanced at the captain, who wasn't smiling, but had something like amusement glittering in her eyes. "It's impressive, I know," she said, gesturing to the window. A part of Wilbur wanted to ask the captain if the cavern was natural, or if they had carved the space out themselves, because it certainly looked natural, but the cavern was large enough to hold an entire city, and Wilbur wasn't sure if it was possible for any single cave to be that large. He also wanted to ask about the ice spikes dangling from above. Was it a safety hazard? Had they ever broken off and fallen onto the city itself before? If not, were they worried about it as a possibility? But this wasn't a casual visit to another planet where Wilbur could pester guards and servants with all the questions that burned in his mind. Their lives were very much still in danger. For all Wilbur knew, they could be laying themselves right down on a guillotine. So he shoved down the questions bubbling up inside of him, and simply let out a small hum before glancing towards the window again. Looking ahead on the rails, Wilbur quickly realized the train would take them straight inside the palace. The looming structure got closer and closer, and soon they were leaving the city behind and passing into a small tunnel on one side. Wilbur briefly mourned the loss of the view, but knew they had more important things to focus on. There was a train platform very similar to the one they boarded the train at. There were less soldiers in the blue military fatigues here, though, and more wearing the dark, shimmering uniforms that the captain and her guards were dressed in. Wilbur supposed that must be to differentiate the palace guards from the standard soldiers. The train came to a smooth stop. The captain pushed to her feet, gesturing for Wilbur and Tommy to get up as well. They both awkwardly shuffled out of their seats, the guards fanning around them once more as the captain led them off the train and onto the platform. A few of the palace guards that were stationed around the platform gave the brothers surprised looks as they walked by, but none vocalized any confusion or concern, instead just dipping their heads in respect to the captain when she glanced their way. There was a chill in the air as they left the platform behind and entered a long, arching hallway. The floor turned to smooth stone, the guards' boots all loudly clicking against it while Wilbur and Tommy's socks were silent in comparison. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot that they were in socks. They never had shoes on this entire time. It's interesting. There was a chill in the air as they left the platform behind and entered a long, arching hallway. Oh wait, no, I'd already said that. The metal walls had been polished to something much more refined than the dull, jagged metal that had redecorated the walls of the hangar. But besides that, there weren't many signs of opulence inside the palace. There were no decorations hanging on the walls, no paintings or carvings or even windows lining the halls. It was smooth, dark, and cold, both in the metaphorical and the literal sense. An icy chill hung in the air, and although it was tolerable, it wasn't anything close to pleasant for Wilbur and Tommy in their thin pajamas. Now Wilbur understood why all the guards wore such thick uniforms. Unlike the palace on Eldingvegger, this place didn't have nearly as many twists and turns to it. They had to make a few rights and lefts here and there, but it was easy for Wilbur to remember the route back to the train platform. Then, after only a few minutes of walking through the palace, they reached a set of huge black doors that stretched all the way to the ridiculously high ceiling. "Is the Emperor ready to see them?" the captain asked one of the guards in front of the tall doors. The guard nodded. Both he and the Imperator are waiting. The Imperator? Is that by any chance Technoblade? Pause chat? The captain nodded, before turning around to face the two of them. "Don't speak until you're granted permission. Understood?" Tommy shot Wilbur a worried look, but Wilbur just nodded, and after a beat of hesitation, Tommy did the same. The captain narrowed her eyes as she looked them both over, before turning on her heel and nodding for the guards to open the doors. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Wilbur's heart pounded a rapid staccato against his ribs, and he squeezed Tommy's hand as the captain led them into what he could only guess was the throne room. There wasn't much about the throne room that was very different from the rest of the palace. It had the same stone floors, a few dark stone pillars here and there, and one wall to the left that was made entirely of glass and looked out onto the city itself. At the front of the room, there was a slightly raised platform, and it was there that Wilbur saw Emperor Filza seated on a simple metal throne. Wilbur wasn't sure what he had been expecting when he imagined Emperor Filza, but one thing was for certain. He hadn't known the man was a Lytrian. Huge dark wings spread out behind Emperor Filza. He was wearing something similar to a cloak that was a shade of deep blue, but it was cut in a way so that it was wrapped around the back of his neck and left his shoulders bare, presumably to leave space for the wings. He was also wearing a sleeveless, dark button-up shirt underneath the cloak, and on his shoulders Wilbur could see small black feathers dotting his skin here and there, almost like freckles. It should have been impossible for Emperor Filza to be a Lytrian. To Wilbur's knowledge, the planet of Elytra had been wiped out over a century prior, but avian wings never grew that large. Only an Elytrian could have wings like Emperor Filza did. There was another man standing beside the Emperor. Immediately, Wilbur took note of the small tusks poking out from his lips, and the bright pink hair he had pulled back in a complicated series of braids. A piglet. He wore a long, thick coat that fell to his calves that was belted at the waist and a similar shade of dark blue to the cloak the Emperor wore. Both were decorated with subtle silver embroidery. A mark of their ranking, perhaps? So distracted by the realization that the Emperor of the Antarctic Empire was an Elytrian, and by the mysterious piglin beside him, Wilbur almost missed it when the captain stepped forward, bowing her head before meeting Filza's gaze. "Your Majesty," she said to Filza, before turning to the piglin. "Your Imperial Highness, I have brought the princes as requested." The Emperor and the piglin both nodded at her in acknowledgement, and she bowed once more before turning on her heel and leaving the throne room. Wilbur's breath caught in his throat as he watched her go, because even though he was terrified of her, she was at least somewhat less intimidating than Filza and whoever the piglin beside him was. The door slid open with another hiss, and the captain disappeared behind them. When they had shut again, Wilbur realized that besides the guards inside the throne room, they were alone with the Emperor. He took a shaky breath as he faced the throne once more. The captain said not to speak until they were given permission, so he kept his lips pressed in a firm line, and could only hope Tommy was doing the same. Silence hung over the room, a taut string just waiting to be cut. Filza's eyes were the same shade of blue as the ice above their heads, and his gaze was just as cold as he looked both Wilbur and Tommy up and down. Beside him, the piglin did the same, with bright gold eyes that reminded Wilbur of the gold jewelry Aerith had always adorned themselves with. After over a full minute of silence, Filza spoke. "State your names," he said, and Wilbur was startled because he had been expecting the man to have a much deeper voice. It carried a sharp accent as well, one that was reminiscent to both his and Tommy's, but still different at the same time. Glancing to his left, Wilbur raised his eyebrows at Tommy. When Tommy clenched his jaw, Wilbur squeezed his hand again, and Tommy took a deep breath to steady himself. Then he let go of Wilbur's hand and stepped forward into a deep bow. "My name is Theseus Thomas Sione, Crown Prince of Eldingvegger," he introduced, his voice wavering as he said his name. Despite his nerves, Wilbur couldn't help the small bit of pride that bloomed inside of him at the fact that Tommy had remembered the proper court etiquette of saying his full name to another monarch. After a beat, Tommy straightened up from the bow and stepped back beside Wilbur. Then, Filza's eyes turned to him, and Wilbur felt his heart skip a beat. Okay, his turn. The same as Tommy, Wilbur stepped forward into a deep bow. "Orpheus Wilbur Soti." Okay, so that's how the O's are pronounced. It's like, okay. Okay. So I definitely pronounced those two names yesterday. Not yet. Those two names in the previous stream wrong. I can't remember what they were. I just know they had that little symbol. Or maybe, because, okay, Theseus Thomas Ione. Ione. Actually, that makes sense. Well, or, oh! It's kind of like in it, but like innie. Like Ione. Ione. I like that. Ione. Anyway. Orpheus Wilbur City, Prince of Eldingvegger. His voice didn't waver like Tommy's did, even though he could barely feel his legs with how badly they were shaking. When he straightened up and returned to Tommy's side again, he noticed the Emperor giving him an odd look. There was a ghost of a smile on his face, but it wasn't anything close to friendly. No, it was the smile of a cat watching a mouse. Prince Orpheus, Philza began, startling Wilbur. How old are you? 19, Your Majesty, Wilbur answered, reaching for Tommy's hand again. Philza hummed before his eyes flickered to Tommy. And how old are you, Prince Theseus? Tommy gulped. 15? The smile grew on his face. And yet you're the crown prince, not your brother. He paused, looking back to Wilbur. Prince Orpheus, are you a bastard? A rock lodged itself in his throat at the obvious taunt in his words. Schooling his expression into a mask of neutrality, Wilbur nodded. Yes, I am. Like a knife sliding across a wet stone, the edges of Phil's smile sharpened even more. His barking laugh rang out across the throne room, jabbing into Wilbur's chest like shards of ice. He squeezed Tommy's hand so hard he had to have been hurting him, but Tommy didn't make any moves to pull his hand away. How interesting, Philza commented once he had stopped laughing, his icy gaze still fixed on Wilbur. Another beat passed. Wilbur forced himself to loosen his grip on Tommy's hand. Then, I suppose we should introduce ourselves properly as well, Philza then said, rising to his feet. His feathers ruffled with the movement, and they stretched above his head as he dipped into a low bow of his own. I'm Philza, Emperor of the Antarctic Empire. Wilbur eyed the dark metal circlet that rested on his pale blonde hair, wondering if it was going to slip off when he dipped his head. The circlet stayed in place, though, and after a moment, the Emperor straightened up and returned to his seat before looking at the piglin. Go on, mate. They probably have no clue who you are. The piglin huffed, as if he was annoyed at having to introduce himself. Technoblade, Imperator of the Antarctic Empire, he said in a gruff voice, bowing his head at the two of them, but nothing else. Ah, this was the military commander of the Empire. With Technoblade's broad shoulders and hulking frame, Wilbur could only imagine how terrifying of a force he must have been in battles. Along with this, now that Wilbur was properly looking at the Imperator, he could see that it wasn't just his eyes that were gold. There was a gold ring settled in his nose, and his pointed ears were lined with gold studs and chains. From the little Wilbur knew of piglins, he was decently sure there was some connection between them and gold, but he didn't know much more than that. So, Philza's voice startled Wilbur out of his thoughts. From what I've been told, you are both requesting the Antarctic Empire grant you asylum. His eyes flickered between Wilbur and Tommy. Do you care to explain why? Glancing at Tommy, Wilbur nudged his shoulder, giving him a pointed look. Again, court etiquette demanded that Tommy be the one to explain the situation, not Wilbur. Tommy paled as he realized this, but straightened his shoulders to meet Emperor Philza's gaze head on. We were attacked, Tommy began, and Wilbur winced at his stammer. We were betrayed by the King Regent, and they sold us out to Prince Theseus. No offense, but I think it might be a bit easier if Prince Orpheus explained the situation to us instead, Technoblade suddenly said, cutting Tommy off. Beside him, Philza nodded in agreement. Tommy flushed in embarrassment, while Wilbur's eyes widened. This wasn't court etiquette, but if the Emperor and the Imperator wanted him to be the one to explain the situation, he couldn't say no. Swallowing down the lump in his throat, Wilbur looked between Philza and Technoblade, before meeting Philza's eyes directly. The Usempi Empire has launched an attack on Elding Vega. Our King Regent gave Emperor Dream secret information that allowed him to ambush us. They struck an agreement for Eldingvega to come under the control of a Sempi in exchange for the King Regent getting to keep their title instead of passing it down to my brother when he turns 18. He took another breath, his voice growing more steady the longer he spoke. Emperor Dream attempted to execute us both. We managed to steal a shuttle and barely escaped with our lives. Philza nodded at this, a crease forming between his brows when Wilbur brought up Dream. So Dream's trying to take over the Blazophane trade then, huh? He huffed out a half laugh. Arrogant prick. Of course he'd go for the wealthiest planet in the entire damn galaxy. It hasn't even been 5 years since he was crowned, no? No, Technoblade answered. He was crowned 3 years ago. Philza hummed. I suppose that poses a problem for us. If Dream holds a monopoly on Blazophane, he'll make it next to impossible for the Antarctic Empire to get it. Then he paused, glancing back at Wilbur. Though I'm sure you've thought of that already, haven't you, Prince Orpheus? Wilbur stiffened. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play dumb. My captain told me you were the one piloting the shuttle from Eldingvega, so I'd wager you were the one who chose to come here for help, not Prince Theseus. The lump in his throat grew bigger, and Tommy pressed closer to his side. What exactly are you asking me? Wilbur said, in as careful of a tone as he could manage. Philza tilted his head to the side, and it reminded Wilbur so much of a bird it was almost eerie. Why did you choose to ask the Antarctic Empire for asylum? You could have hidden out on any planet in the far reaches, the ones that are filled with misfits from all over the galaxy, and yet you came here. Why? It seemed like the most logical choice, because you knew that Dream wouldn't be able to hunt you down. Because you knew that Dream wouldn't be able to hunt you down if he knew you were under our protection. Philza asked, raising an eyebrow. Or was it because you know that our military is the only one that can stand against the Asempi Empire? Because you knew that if I found out Dream was taking control of the Blazophane trade, I might be willing to help you get your planet back. Fuck. While Wilbur hadn't been planning to bring it up in this conversation, that had certainly been in the back of his mind when he chose Zephyrus 4 as their destination. He just hadn't been expecting Philza to recognize it so fast. Am I wrong? Wilbur asked, forcing himself to keep his chin high, even under the weight of both Philza and Technoblade's stares. Beside him, Tommy shot him a sharp look. In his eyes, Wilbur could read the silent question of, "What the fuck are you doing?" as clear as day. He gave Tommy a small nod, hoping that was enough reassurance for his brother despite the anxiety crawling up his own throat. When he turned back to Philza, the man's sharp smile had returned. Wilbur didn't have the slightest clue whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. Your logic is sound, Prince Orpheus. I'm not an idiot. Getting locked out of the Blazophane trade would be disastrous for the Antarctic Empire, Philza told him, his wings rustling as he leaned further back on his throne. But if we were to assist you in reclaiming your planet from Dream, there would need to be something in it for us. You'd still be able to buy Blazophane. Isn't that enough? Tommy suddenly cut in, his words far too sharp for this kind of conversation. Wilbur squeezed Tommy's hand as hard as he could at that, making him wince and try to pull away. But Wilbur didn't let go, instead staring him down and hoping that Tommy got the message to shut the fuck up before he got them killed. Philza, to Wilbur's surprise, laughed again. I don't know, Prince Theseus. Is simply being able to buy Blazophane enough to risk our own troops against Asempes? If we're driving Asempi out, why wouldn't we just take over the Elding Vega for ourselves? Wait, why wouldn't we just take over Elding Vega for ourselves? Then the Antarctic Empire would have a complete monopoly over Blazophane. That's a lot better than just being able to buy the damn stuff. But you wouldn't have anyone to rule Elding Vega, Wilbur pointed out before Tommy could say something even snappier. The minute you began an attack, Dream would likely kill Eret, the King Regent, to make sure there wasn't a ruler you could pin up as your puppet. Even if Eret did survive, they're not a proper heir. You would still be running a risk because Elding Vega has been run by the same bloodline for centuries. I don't think our people would take kindly to that bloodline being tossed aside in favor of a foreign imperial rule. Maybe that's a risk we're willing to take, Technoblade then chimed in, narrowing his golden eyes at the brothers. But it's not one you need to take, Wilbur countered. Not when you have Prince Theseus, the heir to the throne, right here. This time, Phil's smile was all teeth, and somehow even more threatening than before. And that's exactly what I'm getting at. I'm willing to offer you both asylum, but if you want the Antarctic Empire's help with reclaiming Elding Vega, we're going to have some negotiations first. His eyes then slid over to Tommy. Prince Theseus, since you're the heir, it's your decision to make. If you want a minute alone so your brother can tell you what to do, we can arrange that, Technoblade added, raising an eyebrow in silent challenge at Tommy. Wilbur clenched his jaw as Tommy's face turned bright red. I don't need my brother to tell me what to do. We'll negotiate with you, you fucking... Grabbing Tommy's shoulder, Wilbur leaned down next to his ear. Shut the fuck up before you get us killed! Wilbur whisper hissed into his ear. You might want to learn to watch your tongue a bit more, Technoblade then huffed. Like, we have no real obligation to keep you two around. We could kill you if we wanted. Great. They'd gotten a death threat. This was going perfectly. Techno, mate, chill out. These royal kids are usually so well trained. It's nice to see that he's got a bit of fire in him, Philza told him, smirking at the two of them. Wilbur narrowed his eyes, but forced himself to swallow down his rising anger. So we'll negotiate? Philza nodded. We will, but negotiations take time. And to be blunt, you two look pretty goddamn awful, so we're not gonna start them today. We're definitely not gonna start them today. Standing from his throne again, he then waved at the guards near the doors, and Wilbur heard them open with another soft hiss. Then, there was the sound of boots against stone, and the captain reappeared at their side. Puffy, the princes are going to be staying with us for a little while. Will you please show them to the guest wing? Philza ordered. The captain, Puffy apparently, bowed her head. Understood, Your Majesty. Then, Technoblade added. Also, make sure someone brings them food. I keep thinking one of them is gonna pass out and I don't want to get blood on the floor. Puffy nodded. I'll inform the servants. With that, she turned to both of them and waved for them to follow her. Wilbur hesitated, glancing back over his shoulder at Philza and Technoblade. For a brief moment, he met Philza's eyes, and then Tommy was tugging him along, and he was led out of the throne room. As soon as the doors to the throne room shut behind them, Tommy just about collapsed into Wilbur's side, and Wilbur wrapped an arm around his shoulders to pull him close. Puffy paused when she noticed they weren't following her, and Wilbur expected her to tell them to hurry up. Instead, she just stayed silent as the two of them hugged. Wilbur rested his chin on Tommy's head and could feel Tommy's rapid heartbeat pounding against his own chest. Tommy was shaking nearly as badly as Wilbur was, and he frankly had no idea how they made it through that as well as they did. They stayed like that for another minute before Wilbur pulled away. Once they got to their room, they could both lay down and think about what had just happened, but they still had a little ways to go. Puffy didn't say anything when they started walking again, but there was no annoyance on her face. Instead, there was just quiet understanding. The guest wing wasn't terribly far from the throne room. The palace as a whole seemed much smaller than Eldingbecher's, which Wilbur didn't mind because that just made it easier for him to navigate. They came across rows of black doors, and Puffy silently mouthed numbers to herself as she eyed each door they passed. She stopped in front of one and tapped a button on the keypad beside it. The door slid open with a soft whoosh, and then she turned back to both of them. "Prince Orpheus, this is your room. Prince Theseus, yours will be a little down—" "No," Wilbur and Tommy said at the same time, cutting her off. Puffy paused, frowning at them. "No?" Wilbur shook his head. "We stay in the same room." Tommy, who had wrapped himself around Wilbur's arm, nodded in agreement. There was no fucking way Wilbur was letting Tommy stay in a different room than him. Not when Technoblade had so casually pointed out how easy it would be to kill them. Not when they had already nearly died 10 times over just in the past few days. Philza might be offering them asylum, but that didn't mean Wilbur trusted him. Clearly, Tommy felt the same way. Again, Wilbur expected some sign of annoyance from Puffy, but she surprised him once more when she only nodded and gestured to the door. "Alright then. I'll tell the servants to bring both your meals here then. There should be some clothes in the wardrobe as well, but they might be too short on you, Prince Orpheus. We can have some proper clothes tailored for you both in a few days, but they'll work for the time being." Breathing a sigh of relief, Wilbur dipped his head at her. "Thank you, Captain." "Just doing my job," she said, although there was a hint of a smile on her face. "If you need anything, there's a servant call button on the wall." "When are we going to see the Emperor again?" Tommy suddenly asked. Puffy's faint smile disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "I'm not sure. Emperor Philza and Imperator Technoblade are both very busy men, but I'd imagine you'll have another meeting with them in the next few days." Tommy frowned, but didn't say anything at that. Wilbur, who was already starting to sway now that the adrenaline of fearing for his life was wearing off once more, took a step inside the room. "Thanks again, Captain." She nodded and took a step back as Tommy followed Wilbur into the room. "Get some rest. You're both certainly going to need it." And with that, the door slid shut, leaving Tommy and Wilbur alone. Puffy's words hung in the air like the ice spikes that hung from the ceiling of the cavern outside the palace walls. A silent threat. A warning of the disaster that might come. But for now, they were safe. They were the safest they'd been in days. Dream couldn't get them here. No one was actively trying to kill them. Holy shit. They were alive. Despite all odds, Wilbur had kept them both alive. The realization hit him all at once. That for this brief moment, it was over. That Tommy was safe. That he was safe. The weight of this turned Wilbur's legs to jelly as he slumped against the wall, sliding down to the ground and burying his face in his hands. His chest was aching and he felt like all of his insides had been hollowed out. He was relieved. He was exhausted. He was numb. He didn't even realize he was crying until he felt liquid on his hands. Distantly, he heard rustling, before cold hands were tugging on his wrists and forcing him to look up. "Will?" Tommy whispered, his voice cracking in a way that made him sound far younger than he was. "You okay?" "We're alive!" Wilbur laughed through his tears, unsure if the bubbles in his chest were mania or euphoria. Sorry about that. My dad came in the room. Let's see. Unsure if the bubbles in his chest were mania or euphoria. "We're fucking alive, Tommy!" "Yeah, we're alive." Tommy nodded, giving him a small smile. "That stupid green bitch won't find us here." Wilbur huffed out something between a laugh and a sob at that. Green? Sorry about that. My sister and her boyfriend are back, and her boyfriend wanted to see my PC setup because he's tech savvy like that. Anyway, where was I? Green? Your soldiers' uniforms have that ugly-ass shade of green on them, Tommy explained. Snorting, Wilbur nodded. I get it. Yeah, he's a green bitch. A moment of silence passed between them as their smiles faded. Another half sob made Wilbur's chest shudder, and Tommy frowned. "Okay, come on, get up," he said, grabbing Wilbur's hand and pushing to his feet. "We're not gonna sit on the fucking floor when there's a perfectly good bed right over there." Excuse me. Oh fuck. A bed. They'd been sleeping in a small, cramped room for the past few days. The idea of stretching out on a mattress made Wilbur want to cry. Well, he was already crying, but laying on a bed made him want to cry even more. Letting Tommy pull him to his feet, the two of them shuffled over to the bed. The room itself wasn't ridiculously large, but it wasn't cramped either. There was a large bed made up with black and blue blankets, along with a few sitting chairs, a desk shoved against one wall, and a sleek fireplace on the opposite side of the room from the bed. Because of the chill in the air, a part of Wilbur was tempted to go light the fireplace now, but he was also far too exhausted to do anything but lay down, and figured he could just wrap himself up in blankets for the time being. Wilbur fell face first onto the mattress, letting out a low moan at how it cradled all of the sore spots in his body. The mattress dipped as Tommy did the same beside him, and the two just laid face down side by side on the bed for a moment, relishing in the simple comfort of having a real bed again. More tears welled up in Wilbur's eyes. He let out another lapsed sob before rolling over to bury his face in Tommy's chest. He wasn't even fully crying or having a sobbing breakdown. He was too tired for that. Instead, he just continued to laugh quietly as tears streamed down his cheeks. Maybe he was hysterical or having some kind of relief-induced breakdown, but he didn't care. All he cared about was that they were alive. Tommy wrapped his arms around Wilbur and started absently combing his fingers through his hair. Normally, Wilbur wouldn't let Tommy comfort him like this. He'd force himself to calm down because he had to take care of his little brother, not the other way around. But Wilbur was just too tired for that. Way too fucking tired. So he just stayed like that. Neither one said anything the entire time. They didn't need to. In the end, Wilbur fell asleep like that until the servant knocked on the door with 2 trays of some strange-looking roasted meat and vegetables neither of them recognized. The power of his rumbling stomach overrode his exhaustion, and the two of them practically inhaled their plates. The food was surprisingly good, although they both ate so fast Wilbur doubted either one tasted it very much. Once that was done, Wilbur told Tommy he could use the shower first since he knew neither of them had to smell very good. While Tommy was showering, Wilbur figured out how to light the fireplace, thanks to an easy-to-use control panel right beside it. And soon the chill in the air had disappeared thanks to the flickering orange flames. After Tommy got out of the shower, with bags under his eyes and his curls dark and wet against his forehead, Wilbur took his turn and practically doused himself in burning water. It felt so good to wash away the grime of the crawl space off his skin, to try and rid himself of the past few days like they were nothing but a bad dream. Obviously, that wasn't true. The soap didn't smell the same. The water had a strange metallic taste to it when it accidentally got in Wilbur's mouth, and the shower head was just a bit too low for him, so he had to bend down to get his hair wet. But if he closed his eyes for just a moment, he could almost pretend he was back home. By the time Wilbur walked out of the bathroom in the rather simple but still soft pajamas he'd found in the closet, Tommy had already passed out on the bed. He was holding a pillow to his chest like a stuffed toy, and Wilbur made sure to turn the lights in the room off before he carefully crawled into the bed beside him. Despite his efforts, Tommy still cracked one eye open as Wilbur laid down. "Took you long enough, bitch," he slurred out, his voice muffled by the pillow shoved in his face. "Go back to sleep, gremlin," Wilbur whispered, rolling onto his other side so he was facing the wall. "Tiny children need their rest." Tommy made an angry noise at that, but was too tired to argue against it. Instead, Wilbur felt a weak punch against his back, and snorted as he let his eyes flutter shut. Then, there was a more solid weight against him when Tommy pressed his forehead against his back. He still had the pillow in his arm, so that was also awkwardly shoved between them, but Wilbur didn't mind. After the terror of the past few days, Just knowing Tommy was right behind him was a silent comfort in itself. While Wilbur had no idea what the next few days were going to bring, they were alive for now. And that was enough. Man, oh man. Good chapter, good chapter. Also gave me a bit more practice with Phil's accent. Alright. I think that is going to be my stream. Excuse me, Jesus, sorry. Thank you guys so much for watching. Might stream tomorrow, might not. More likely that I'll stream on Wednesday. Don't know what that'll be. Probably Minecraft or something. It's been a while since I've been on my single player 1.19 server or world or whatever. So figure we might delve back into that. But in the meantime, again, thank you so much for watching. And I will see you guys in the next stream. I said that in a really weird kind of way. I'll see you guys in the next stream. There we go. Alright. Bye-bye!